So off they go on their final formation lap ahead of this race, which is round 18 of the 2023 GT Cup Championship under safety car conditions. So it is a safety car start. You can see the clock is already ticking, so in reality we're already racing, because even after this we've got other support races to get through. But it looks as though Seamus Jennings in the GCAT Racing Porsche has stalled on the grid. It is not going through and goes past Jay Shepherd, through and past goes Chris Murphy. So even if that Porsche gets going, everybody has now overtaken it, so it will have to start off the very back of the grid. And there you can see the standing water as well we've got. Let's guide you through the starting grid then and the drivers. Andrei Borodin starts from pole position. When that car is in the pits, it remains stationary for 85 seconds, and alongside is Sasha Kakad at the wheel of the Audi. That car will remain stationary for 95. Row 2 of the grid, it's Gilbert Yates that starts. The Lamborghini will be stationary for 75 come the pit stop window, and alongside is the Ferrari of James Owen, 80 seconds in the pits for that car. Row 3 of the grid, Paul Bailey will start in the Lamborghini, 105 seconds when he gives way to the Scotsman and former British GT4 champion Ross Wiley. And for company, it's the number 69 Mercedes. Stephen Walton starts. He'll remain stationary for 60 seconds. Row 4 of the grid, it's son Dan Dazil that will start, handing over to father in the Ferrari. 70 seconds as that car remains stationary. And alongside, we should have had the number 91 of David Franklin. That car, if it starts from the pit lane, when it comes into the pits for the driver change in the window, will remain stationary for 80 seconds. Row 5 of the grid, Patrick Collins will start 60 seconds in the pit lane when he gives way to Russ Lindsay. And alongside is Charles Dawson. The Mercedes will remain stationary for 105 seconds when former British GT champion Seb Morris takes over. Row 6 of the grid, Paul Rogers in the McLaren, 90 seconds in the pit lane, alongside Simon Orange at the wheel of his McLaren, 100 seconds when the Welshman Tom Roach jumps on board. The 7th row of the grid, Seamus Jennings, that's the car that's stalled on the grid, so will ultimately have to start at the back, but 60 seconds in the pit lane, and alongside is Phil Carter, 100 seconds when he gives way to Mikey Broadhurst in the Group GTH McLaren. And row 8 of the grid, it is Jay Shepherd in the Lotus, 70 seconds in the pit lane, and then a gap alongside where we should have had the next car. It will be Doc Bush, therefore, who will remain stationary for 60 seconds in the Porsche. And then the final row of the grid is going to be Chris Murphy, 75 seconds, he drives solo, and alongside is Adam Knight when he gives way to Ewan Mackay. That car will remain stationary for 85 seconds in the pit lane, the Ram Racing Mercedes. That's the grid. You can see the water. Seamus Jennings in the GCAT Racing Porsche has been pushed off the grid and is now in the pit lane, where the team will no doubt plug in the laptop and try and understand as to what the problem is with that car, and hopefully they'll be able to get it fired up and going. But for the moment, he is potentially a non-starter. Now, the lights are still on the safety car. We did hear it's going to be 2 laps behind the safety car to give the drivers the opportunity to acclimatise to these conditions. And whilst the sprint race was, as Piers Pryor alluded to when he was down in the pit lane with Amber Jones, was on the cusp of, was it the slick tyre, was it the wet tyre that you needed to use? And there was no real difference over the race distance between the two. It's certainly the wet tyre towards the end of the race, but the slick was better in the early stages as the conditions just worsened and worsened and worsened. Well, for this, no doubt, everybody on a full set of, no doubt, hopefully, very new wet tyres. You don't want an old set in this one because you've got less tread in reality, which means it can't disperse as much water, so you need a good set of wet tyres for this one. The Control Pirelli wet tyre that's available to all of the teams being utilised, and as they now head off onto their second lap behind the safety car, hopefully at the end of this lap we'll be able to get going. We'll have to wait and see how Adam Knight gets on from the tail end of the field in the Mercedes. I can see David Franklin did join the grid by the look of things. The 24/7 Mercedes was at the tail end of the field there. I just spotted the number 91 car. The other car I didn't quite spot, though, was Adam Knight in the Ram Racing Mercedes. So I'm just going to keep an eye on the field as it goes past me now. There's Philip Carter. There is Doc Bush. There is Jay Shepherd. There is Chris Murphy. There is David Franklin. I can't see the number 8 Mercedes, so there's a bit of a question mark as to whether that car, with its light touch into the barriers earlier on in the sprint race, was able to take the start or not. So up towards Stowe Corner go the pack of cars. We've lost 2 or 3 over the course of the weekend. We understand the safety car will be in at the end of this lap, so as it heads down and through Club, the lights remain on. Usually extinguishes its lights as it heads down the Wellington Straight, and confirmation from race control now being that further assessment has been done. The safety car is going to stay out for a further lap for the moment, so they were thinking about bringing it in. They are going to leave it out there at this stage. There's continual communication process going on between the safety car driver, who is the man behind the wheel. Sitting in the passenger seat of that car is the safety car observer, so the driver just concentrates on driving, and if he is the professional driver who will understand what the conditions are like, he'll be communicating that to the safety car observer to say, look, I just think it's too wet to go at the moment. The safety car observer then in the passenger seat will radio to race control to say, this is what we think of the conditions out there. Race control also have not just lots of CCTV cameras around the Silverstone Grand Prix circuit to understand what's going out there. They'll also get our live feed as well. And all of that allows them to go through this decision-making process to understand whether it's safe to go racing. Of course, we want everybody to go home having had a good day and some really close racing. What we don't want them to do is go home, A, with damaged cars, and B, damaged people. So those assessments have to be done. Safety always has to be the priority, and unless everybody is entirely satisfied that it's safe to go racing, we'll keep just pounding around behind the safety car for the moment, and that is what's going to happen still for at least one further lap. The good thing is the circulation of the cars will at least start to remove some of this moisture, but you can see very quickly as the cars go around the circuit, the tyres remove a bit of the moisture, but within a split second it's covering up the tracks that they were on once more. And even then you can see the different lines they're taking, even at this lower speed. The likes of Simon Orange there trying a very wide sweep around Brooklands, and that wasn't because he missed the apex and braked too late behind the safety car. That was because he wanted to see, when he rotated the car quite quickly through that corner, did it grip? And if it did grip, he now knows what that piece of tarmac was doing at that speed, and was that a bit more grip than he had when he tried a different line, still under the safety car, but a different line on the previous lap. So it's all an educational process for these drivers. You might just think that they are just sitting behind the safety car waiting to get things underway, but they are absolutely, like, no pun intended, sponges, soaking everything up at this stage to work out, when we go racing, where is the grip in these conditions, where is the standing water. That puddle that was there on the previous lap has now gone. However, that's a new puddle now, or that puddle is there, but I can see where the water is bleeding off from one part of the circuit to the others. Even the apex there, look at the standing water right on the apex of that corner, right on the white line. The one thing you now know is that's there. I don't want to be apex now. I don't want to be clipping the curb there. I need to stay about a foot away from the curb, and then I'm not in the standing water. And all of that is all being observed by these drivers here. So a 50-minute race. We're 8 minutes into it, and all of those 8 minutes so far have been spent behind the safety car. And even at these speeds, just look at the spray that's coming up, the rooster tails that are coming up. Andre Borodin has probably rather pleased that he set the fastest lap earlier on, because yes, his windscreen isn't going to be clear because of the rain that's hitting it, but he hasn't got the spray hitting it. When things get underway, he'll be the only driver that will have a reasonable amount of visibility. Everybody else is really going to be struggling, and you almost on occasions have to either drive to the high intensity light of the car in front, or you have to drive with your peripheral vision to understand where your braking points are, because you can't see out of the windscreen anymore because of the spray. You have to say, okay, well, that's the point at which I brake. When I get to that mark, or when that piece of circuit disappears out of my vision, that's the point at which I need to brake. So different way to drive the car now, different lines that you take, and hopefully we'll see the safety car lights extinguished. They would usually be extinguished not just after this corner, so they're just coming in towards Village now. When they head out of the loop and Aintree and part the way along the Wellington Straight, that's usually when the lights get flicked out. So the decision was made to leave the car out there for an extra lap. Are we now at the stage where the drivers have had sufficient time to acclimatise to the conditions, or are we going to see another lap behind the safety car? So safety car working its way up towards the top section of the Wellington Straight. The lights are off, which means we're going to go racing at the end of this lap. Now, it will be not a 2x2 start to this race, because we have started the race, and in theory it's a safety car start, and it should be single file up towards the start finish line. So we're going to get things underway here, and we've also got that pit window that we need to think about as well, which for today the cars in Group GTH pit between the 24th and the 29th minute of the race, and all the rest of the cars will pit between the 29th and the 35th minute of the race. So Andre Borodin is about to get the race underway, feed the power in, try and get a good start. have a nice clear view as you head up towards Copse Corner, and with 40 minutes to go, we finally get the race underway. Now, in theory, there should be no overtaking until the start-finish line, so everybody's just got to choose their moment as to when they want to dive on the throttle and make sure that they do not shuffle positions. And as they've gone through the first corner, you can see that the pack is rather strung out, but Andre Borodin leads the way. Sasha Kakad in second position, Gilbert Yates in third, and it's going to be James Owen that's there in fourth position. So for Greystone GT, Andre Borodin leads the way from the Audi. The early stages of Group GTC is that Lamborghini that leads Group GTC for the challenge specification cars. And he's got another challenge spec car, which is James Owen's Ferrari, somewhere in the spray and the ball of the spray in the background. The black nose to the Ferrari, the yellow tail end to the Ferrari. But thankfully everybody, I think, treating the circuit with a reasonable degree of respect in these tricky conditions. Gilbert Yates, though, is throwing caution to the wind a little bit. He's almost drawing himself alongside Sasha Kakad in his efforts to get through and up into second position. Top Cats Racing, who've been regulars in the GT Cup Championship and are looking for a good result in Group GTC as well as a good result in the Teams Championship, which means a lot to them. They've had a solid weekend so far. Down in fourth place, though, watch out for the two Ferraris again. We saw good things in the sprint race earlier on, if you were watching it, in changeable conditions when Tom Fleming was behind the wheel of the number 26 Ferrari. Well, it's James Owen in the early part of this one, but he has, by the look of things, just been overtaken. Didn't quite see it on the stream, but Dan Dazil in the red Ferrari with the yellow stripe down the centre has gone through and ahead of the Ferrari Challenge spec car. And Group GTH in the early stages is being led by that car there, which is the Morpheus Racing Mercedes, the number 69 car in the hands of Stephen Walton. And that's the car that Chris Hart brought to second overall in the changeable conditions earlier on today in the sprint race. So down the Wellington Straight, Andre Borodin still leading the way. The start of the weekend, talking to Rich Mason about how much I thought Andre Borodin had come on this season, and particularly over the course of the last couple of weekends. Well, case in point, fastest lap in the changeable conditions earlier on, starting from pole in this one, and at the moment, I wouldn't say comfortable, but is not putting a wheel wrong, just making sure he gets around the corners as quickly as he possibly can. And for Sasha Kakad, of course, you know, he will be treating this race with an element of caution, knowing that any small mistake could have a big consequence, because of course you just miss a braking point and all of a sudden in the wet it exacerbates the problem if you either running wide or touching the grass. So not quite as easy to overtake when you don't have the visibility in the weather conditions. So Andre Borodin doing a very good job at the moment for himself and the team. Sasha Kakad in the Audi, sitting there in second position. Do need to look at how long these cars will remain stationary as well. Andre Borodin, when he gives way to Ed Peed, 85 seconds in the pit lane for that car. The Audi will remain stationary for an additional 10 seconds. So if Andre Borodin can hang on to the lead of the race, that is only good news for them when they get towards the pit window. The Lamborghini in the hands of Gilbert Yates, that remained stationary for just 75 seconds come the pit window, whereas the Ferrari behind, 70 seconds when Dan Dazil gives way to Graham Dazil. So ideally that red and yellow Ferrari needs to sit right on the coattails of the Lamborghini, because come the pit stops they might be able to leapfrog it, and those are all the extra dynamics that come into play in the pit stop races here in the GT Cup Championship. So the top four together, McLaren from Audi, from Lamborghini, from Ferrari, as ever, lots of variety amongst the marks. Then it's going to be another Ferrari in fifth place, Mercedes in sixth, McLaren in seventh, Lamborghini in eighth, Porsche in ninth, and another Mercedes that completes the top 10 at the moment, which will be Charles Dawson. Andre Borodin ran a little bit wide there going in towards Village and up towards the loop. Needs to be careful on his exit here, otherwise Sasha Kakad could get the overlap, but a big wiggle from the Audi as he carried a little bit too much enthusiasm to get on the power coming out of the loop, so just had to lift off for a split second, and now of course he's back in the spray of Andre Borodin and not able to see a great deal as they head down the Wellington Straight. Now for Sasha Kakad, he also needs to watch his mirrors, because he's got Gilbert Yates right with him, the third place Lamborghini that leads Group GTC, but right behind Gilbert Yates is the fourth place Ferrari, which is second in Group GTC, so it's GT3 cars first and second, challenge specification cars, i.e. in the case of the Lamborghini a Super Trofeo spec car, and then a Ferrari challenge car in fourth place. So over the start-finish line they'll go, and Gilbert Yates has got the run on Sasha Kakad in a straight line. We know the GTC cars are quick, and through goes Gilbert Yates to pick up second place overall in the race. And that's good news for him now, because he's now also got a car between himself and Dan Dazil, which could prove important. Dan Dazil having just set the fastest lap of the race we've seen so far, 2 minutes 25.465 for the fourth placed Ferrari. So Andre Borodin still leading the way. 0.7 of a second is the lead advantage. Onto the hangar straight they'll go once more. In a straight line, the Lamborghini may well just close up on the McLaren. Through the corners, it's not going to be quite as efficient though, because better aero on the GT3 spec cars than there are on the Challenge spec cars. And also Simon Orange is starting to thread his way through the order as well. Bearing in mind that car started 12th on the grid, Simon Orange. Well, he is now up into 7th position. Can't rule out Simon Orange, that's why he is a double champion in GT Cup. Gilbert Yates gets a little bit sideways. You could also see the twitch from Sasha Kakad in the Audi. I think that's a mixture of getting on the throttle early, hitting the curbs, and also that's the point at which, as they come out of club, there's a stream of water going from one side of the circuit to the other. That's just meaning that those cars just twitch under acceleration as the drivers try and deal with everything. It must be a real attack on the senses as you try and cope with everything that's being thrown at you, not just in terms of what's happening in the race, but the weather conditions and the fact that lap after lap after lap, the water isn't necessarily in the same places each time. Andre Borodin going beautifully well at the moment. Back on the power, feeding it in. Driver who's raced in the Porsche Sprint Championship. He's done a bit of karting in the past as well, has Andre Borodin, but has largely concentrated on GT Cup and British GT for the last couple of years. But Gilbert Yates at the wheel of the Top Cats Racing Lamborghini, very, very confident on the brakes, squeezes his way through and picks up the lead. So it's a Group GTC Lamborghini that leads, and the leading Group GT3 car is Andre Borodin now into second place. And again, watch his mirrors. He's got Sasha Kakad looking to try and attack him, not just for second, but for the lead of the Group GT3. There goes Simon Orange through shot, still trying to thread his way through the order. You can just see absolutely nothing with a spray that's hanging in the air down towards Copse Corner. Finally out of the gloom comes Simon Orange. And again, just that little bit of curb on exit. You have to be so careful so as to not pick up the throttle. Andre Borodin really feeling the pinch though. Sasha Kakad right behind him, and Sasha Kakad wants to attack. He's got to try and be conscious of defence as well, because Dan Dazil is closing in, and again in a straight line. Has that Ferrari got the grunt over the GT3 cars? It looks as though it may well have. He goes through and ahead of Sasha Kakad, and what can he do about Andre Borodin as they head up towards Stowe Corner? He might just try all the way around the outside at the wheel of the Ferrari, and he's making it stick. The less polished surface is going to work, and it is. Yep, from fourth at the start of the lap up to second for Dan Dazil now. We know he likes these conditions. Well, he's relishing them at the moment. As Sasha Kakad goes up the inside of Andre Borodin to take third place away and pick up the lead of Group GT3. Brilliant stuff. Gilbert Yates leads the way. Dan Dazil in second, Sasha Kakad in the Audi now in third. Then the McLaren of the pole-sitting car of Andre Borodin sitting there in fourth place. Fifth at the moment is going to be Simon Orange now. He gained another 2 places on the previous lap, so the car that started down in 12th is now up into 5th place, the Orange Racing powered by JMH number 67 McLaren. He'll hand it over to Tom Roach, and that car will have to remain stationary, however, for 100 seconds in the pit, so it needs to make progress in the early stages of this race, because it's going to have to stop for longer than the other GT3 cars ahead of it, those being Sasha Kakad and Andre Borodin. Sasha Kakad will remain stationary for 5 seconds less than this number 67 McLaren. Andre Borodin, when he gives way to Ed Peed, will remain stationary for 15 seconds less than that McLaren. So Gilbert Yates, with half an hour to go, splashes his way for the 7th time round through Luffield Corner. Dan Dazil is not letting up though on his efforts to try and pressurise that race-leading Lamborghini. Now in Group GTC, we saw a win for Tom Fleming earlier on. That was the first win overall this season for a Group GTC car. are we going to see another win for a Group GTC car? We'll have to wait and see, because there's still half an hour to go in this one. Now, Gilbert Yates, when he gives way to Charlotte Gilbert, 75 seconds that car will remain stationary. For the Ferrari that's trying to hunt him down, Dan Dazil, this is good because he is still right on the coattails of the race-leading Lamborghini, but that Ferrari will spend 5 seconds less in the pits than anybody else, and is also now lapping quicker than anybody else. 1 minute 23.169 for the second place Ferrari. So it keeps the Dazil family Ferrari in a good position, and that's Andre Borodin's off by the look of things. He's come out of Chapel Curve and he's lost the tail end of the McLaren. He's spun to the left-hand side of the circuit, and I think he's avoided contact with the barriers there, but that was such a brilliant stint that was being put in by Andre Borodin. But as I say, one small mistake, that's it, and I'm afraid that he probably isn't out of the race. He needs to get the car fired up. The difficulty is he's on wet grass. The car has very low ground clearance, and if it's sunk into the wet grass, then he just might not be able to get it going again. Fingers crossed he will, but that is such a shame for Andre Borodin and for Ed Peed as well. So that's a fourth place car tumbling down through the order, which now means that the two GTC cars that are first and second respectively have a bit of daylight between themselves and the Audi of Sasha Kakad, and equally Sasha Kakad now has a huge gap between himself in third and the fourth place car of Simon Orange. Andre Borodin's on his way again. Yep, so just saw the car coming out of Stowe Corner there, so he's got it fired up. He will continue in the race. He's tumbled, sadly, a long way down through the order. Along the Wellington Straight, this is lap number 7 at the moment. Gilbert Yates still leading the way. Takes the usual racing line in towards Brooklands this time through, whereas Dan Dazil takes a much, much wider sweep through the corner. Gilbert Yates takes the wide sweep through Luffield, and again you can see how far away they are from the apex in these wet conditions, because the outside line in the wet conditions gives you far more grip than the regular racing line, because the tarmac isn't as polished. All, of course, the rubber that goes down in dry conditions and little bits of oil that all sit on that racing line all seep up to the surface in the wet conditions, and it actually makes the usual racing line quite slick. The outside line is usually the quicker one. So for Simon Orange, is he closing in further on the cars ahead? Well, at the moment, yes, he's quicker than Sasha Kakad. He was almost a second quicker than the Audi lap time through, albeit he's still nearly 8 seconds adrift of the third place Audi. The leading two are still together as well. Gilbert Yates can't quite shake away Dan Dazil. There was a second, 1.1, 1.2 seconds between the pair of them, but remember the Ferrari will stop for 5 seconds less in the pits than the Lamborghini. So Dan Dazil is dealing with the task in hand, I would imagine, and I would imagine there'd be lots of radio traffic from the team saying, right, stick with it, as long as you're within 5 seconds of him, the race should come to us. Stephen Walton's doing a good job at the wheel of the number 69 Mercedes as well for Morpheus Racing. That car runs in 6th position overall, but leads Group GTH, and leads it by a very substantive margin actually, because he's in 6th place. The next Group GTH car is down in 10th position, which is Charles Dawson. So good run by Make Happen Racing, and we've seen some good runs from them all season. This is a true sporting combination, or two AM drivers coming together, which means they stop for a very short amount in the pit stops. That car will only remain stationary for 60 seconds in the pit stops, but of course what happens is once we get the rest of the Group GTH fields, a lot of those and competitors swap over to the pro drivers, so the likes of Mikey Broadhurst and the likes of Seb Morris all jump on board, and they're going to be quicker than Chris Hart. No disrespect to Chris, but he's an AM driver up against pros, and what slowly happens is they catch up, but that Morpheus Mercedes has built a good advantage in the early stages. Group GTO leader Paul Bailey, who is a multiple group champion in GT Cup over the years, has got the Group GT3 Paul Rogers McLaren behind him. This will be for position as well. The McLaren with a bit of tape to the front following its incident that it had in the sprint race earlier on. And this is going to be for 8th and 9th position. Group GTO car ahead of Group GT3 car. Paul Bailey might let the McLaren go through because it's not going to affect the championship scoring for the Lamborghini. He's not going to make it easy, I'm sure, as they head along the Wellington Straight. They're on lap number 9 at the moment. The race leader has just gone over the start-finish line onto lap number 10 by the look of things. So Paul Bailey still keeping at bay the 76 entered McLaren of Paul Rogers. Now, back marker Lapri coming into effect now. Keith Bush, or Doc Bush, the orthopaedic specialist from down in London, keeping out of harm's way, former motorcycle racer, allows Gilbert Yates to go through, but Dan Dazil has certainly closed that gap back up again. Last time through, another new fastest lap of the race for Dan Dazil. 2 minutes 21.223. You can see the differing lines that they take going in towards Club. Dan Dazil a little bit quicker on the exit, I would say, coming out of Club Corner, as the Lamborghini still sort of wiggles round underneath Gilbert Yates. And through the first sector of this lap, 0.2 of a second quicker was Dan Dazil again in the Ferrari, slowly edging up towards the coattails of those around. Into the pit lane, so the pit window opens for the cars in Group GTH. So that is Philip Carter who is in to hand over to Mikey Broadhurst. We saw that car claim its first group win in Group GTH yesterday. Mikey is the pro. That car will remain stationary for 100 seconds in the pit lane. It's not the only car that's in though, because Charles Dawson is in to hand over to former Sunoco Challenge winner and British GT champion Seb Morris. So Seb jumps on board, and the 27-year-old will take over that car. Former Ginetta Junior Winter Series champion and former Renault Winter Series champion. He won the Ginetta Junior Championship overall in 2011, and then of course won British GT with Rick Parfitt Jr. in the Bentley back in 2017. So Dan Dazil absolutely now on the coattails, almost rubbing bodywork with the Lamborghini, flashing his lights. Brilliant driving from both. To be so close to each other without touching in these conditions when you can see nothing is brilliant stuff. And they've also got more traffic to deal with as well. So Dan Dazil still trying to hunt down the lead of the race. Gilbert Yates doing brilliant things at the wheel of the Top Cats Racing Lamborghini since he jumped on board it. New fastest lap of the race this time through has gone to Simon Orange, 2 minutes 20.919. So he has closed the gap on Sasha Kakad by a further 0.6 of a second that time through. He still sets there 4th overall and 2nd in Group GT3. For the Group GTH cars, those that came into the pits, the pit window is open. They've almost finished their pit stop. So Mikey Broadhurst now at the wheel of the McLaren heads back out onto the circuit. Also Seb Morris at the wheel of the Mercedes trundles his way back out onto track. But for the cars that run in Group GTO, Group GT3, Group GTC, pit window isn't quite open for them as yet. Jay Shepherd in the National Motorsport Academy Lotus moves out of harm's way, allowing the leading pair to squeeze their way through. David Frankland is in to hand over to Ed Bridle. So that's the car that was running in the top 4 in the sprint race earlier on today. Also into the pit lane comes the number 69 car, so that is going to be Stephen Walton, handing over to Chris Hart. Subtle adjustment of tyre pressures whilst that takes place. And that car, remember, was leading Group GTH and will only remain stationary for 60 seconds, so it could work its way further up through the order potentially. But of course we've now got the pros climbing on board, the likes of Seb Morris and Mikey Broadhurst, which are going to try and hunt down that car that was leading Group GTH. As for the front runners overall, remember the pit window for the second batch of cars opens between the 29th and the 35th minute of the race. So we are pretty much at that point. We're about 15 seconds away, aren't we, from the second of the pit windows opening. And at that point, we could then potentially see our overall race leaders come in. But what are they going to do? Are they going to leave Gilbert Yates out a bit longer? Are they going to leave Dan Dazil out a bit longer? They can't come in, I don't think, just as yet. They could, actually. By the time they got to pit entry, the window would be open. So I think the window is open now for the second batch of cars. But no takers in the front two. Sasha Kakad doesn't come in either, because that's the Audi's lights through the gloom in the background. So through Copse Corner, and then everything goes grey again. And then the next car we should see would be Simon Orange, but Simon Orange has come for the pit lane. So into the pit lane from 4th place comes Simon Orange to hand over to Tom Roach. So they're pitting right at the sharp end of the window. Ed Bridle has now jumped on board the number 91 24/7 prepared Mercedes that's just been vacated by David Franklin. So there is Tom Roach sprinting over to the McLaren. It looks as though Jay Shepherd is in the background at the wheel of the Lotus. You can see the water pouring off the door, the front edge of that door, the gull wing door, And Simon Orange, you could just see his eyes, the focus on his eyes as he got out of the car. You know, you cannot afford any lapse in concentration in these conditions, and brilliant stint from Simon Orange to work that car through from 12th in the order up to 4th position as it was. Into the pit lane also, that is James Owen at his in to hand over to Tom Fleming. So that car remains stationary for 80 seconds in the pit lane area. But the leading pair and the leading trio, you could argue, because Sasha Kakad has stayed out, continue. So it's still Lamborghini from Ferrari, from Audi, that being Gilbert Yates from Dan Dazil, and then Sasha Kakad. Group GTC cars in first and second. The first of the Group GT3 cars is going to be Sasha Kakad, that's there in third place. And I think the thing we need to watch out for is when the Audi stops, it will be stopping for 95 seconds. The McLaren of Simon Orange stopped for 100 seconds, so some of that rate of close from Simon Orange is going to be negated by the fact that car will stop for 5 seconds longer than the Audi. So it means that Tom Roach has got a big chunk of work to do if he then wants to catch Hugo Cook for the second part of the race, who will take over the Audi. Paul Bailey's out of the Group GTO leading Lamborghini, handing it over to Ross Wiley, who we also see competing in the Porsche Carrera Cup GB. But is this going to be the lap when we see the race leader come in? Gilbert Yates still being shadowed by Dan Dazil. Tom Roach rejoins at the wheel of the McLaren. And into the pit lane, we've got one, and that's the Lamborghini that's in. So Gilbert Yates is heading down pit lane to hand the car over to Charlotte Gilbert. And that means now that Dan Dazil picks up the lead of the race. Now he can still stay out there for a further lap, so he has to pit really at the end of this lap, because if he leaves it for another lap thereafter, I think it's going to be too late. More cars also diving for the pit lane include Paul Rogers, ready to hand over to James Wallace, and also Andre Borodin is in as well to hand over to Ed Peed. Chris Murphy in the BMW also enters the pit lane this lap through. So there is Ed Peed about to head out. Just waiting for the clock to tick away. And out goes the newly married man Ed Peed. Into the pit lane comes Warwick Gilbert. Into the pit lane comes Gilbert Yates to hand over to Charlotte Gilbert in the Top Cats Racing Lamborghini. Looks as though Orange Racing, powered by JMH, are ready to receive Patrick Collins as well at the wheel of the Porsche, which I don't think has pitted yet. And that car does come in, so that'll be Russ Lindsay that will jump on board that car. And straight away, we have got Dan Dazil with a new fastest lap of the race, 2 minutes 20.192 this time through. So Dan Dazil flying around the circuit and looking to see if he can leapfrog that Lamborghini from Top Cats Racing in the pits, because remember, the Ferrari's stopping for 5 seconds shorter than the Lamborghini, and with the new fastest lap of the race for Dan Dazil, that's exactly what they want to see at this stage of the race. Tom Roach having taken over the number 67 Orange Racing, powered by JMH McLaren, the former Mazda MX-5 champion. Pressing on. Again, just using those curves. You've got to be so gentle on the throttle as you hit that painted surface. And we'll have to wait and see. It's going to take a couple of laps to just see how everything settles down, based on the fact that cars haven't all pitted at exactly the same time. But it certainly looks as though Tom Roach is ahead of Graham Dazil's Ferrari. And that is surely going to leave... Dan Dazil's Ferrari. That is surely going to mean that they've got plenty of time to service that car. Right, out to the pit lane goes Hugo Cook. This is an important one. Where is Tom Roach on circuit? So Sasha Kakad has vacated the Audi. Hugo Cook heads out on track as up towards Copse Corner comes Tom Roach, bottled up behind Ed Bridle at the moment. Where is the Audi at pit lane exit? We'll have to wait and see. Charlotte Gilbert is now on board the Lamborghini that was doing such good things in the hands of Gilbert Yates. And through has gone Hugo Cook and Tom Roach. So it is the Audi that is ahead of the McLaren. I did say that some of the rate at close would be negated by the extra 5 seconds the Audi would spend in the pit lane relative to the McLaren. So it does mean now that, yeah, that's the gap that Tom Roach has to try and close up if he wants to try and scoop up what I think would be group win number 6 of the season for Orange Racing, powered by JMH. So as the race continues, let's see if we can head down to the pit lane and catch up with a driver or two.
Gilbert Yates, wow, that's a hell of a stint out there. It's definitely a bit damp. Just talk to us about your position, because it looked like you're well in tune with the car.
So we'd off to start, and I was able to hold third. I couldn't see anything on the brake light, and I thought, okay, these guys will pull away because they're GT3s. They've got the aero kits. There's much more grip than we do. I was on second-hand wets, so I thought a whole third, and then I actually realised they were braking too early, and I thought I could brake later. So I just thought, let's clear. But it was so hard. The water starts coming into the car because I needed air and I needed to get the window open, the wee hatch, and it was just thought, get on with it. It was just it. Very steady, surface water, the whole lot.
But it looked great fun, so thanks very much for chatting to us. Hopefully Charlotte can bring it home.
Thank you, take care, yeah. Hope you do.
Cheers Gilbert. Back to you, Mark.
Brilliant stint, thanks Piers, brilliant stint from Gilbert Yates, and it is Charlotte Gilbert now that has taken over that number 2 car. Into the pit lane has come Dan Dazil in the race-leading Ferrari to hand it over to his father, Graham Dazil, who the best part of 30 years ago was racing in the British Formula 3 Championship, for which the current version of that, GB3, is also on the calendar and the timetable for this weekend here at Silverstone. So where is Graham Dazil going to feed back out? He's fed back out into the lead of the race by the look of things. So Graham Dazil leads, 14 minutes to go. It is going to be Charlotte Gilbert in second position, Hugo Cook in third, and with the fastest lap of the race, Tom Roach now with a 2-minute 19.172 in the number 67 McLaren is there in fourth position. But we need to wait until the end of this lap to see what the relative gap is on track between race-leading number 19 Ferrari of Graham Dazil and then Charlotte Gilbert's Lamborghini. So splashing his way down through the Vale goes Graham Dazil. Heading out of Chapel goes Tom Roach at the wheel of the fourth-placed McLaren, and the gap between McLaren and Audi has definitely come down. We know that because of the fastest lap of the race, and through the first sector of this lap it looks as though Hugo Cook has sort of responded to the pace of the McLaren, so he's tried to bring the advantage further back up. Tom Roach was on the very edge of the circuit there, almost onto the green painted tarmac on the edge of the circuit. That would have affected the amount of grip that he'd got, so he's pushing hard to see if he can close up. I don't think there'll be anything other than focused on securing a group win in this one. You don't need the overall wins, it's where you finish in your group that's important. So all that McLaren needs to do, catch and get past the Audi. Sounds easy, doesn't it? In these conditions, with 12 3/4 minutes to go, it's not. And now we've got a new fastest lap of the race, and that has come from the youngster James Wallace at the wheel of the McLaren, taking over the car from Paul Rogers. 2 minutes 18.366 for the car that's down in 9th position overall and currently 4th in Group GT3. Now that does mean that James Wallace in that Dayglow orange car is now only 2.5 seconds off Ed Peed, and Ed Peed of course is driving the car that was vacated by Andre Borodin and was a pole sitting car, so that would be a change for group position if James Wallace can catch and get past. Charlotte Gilbert in the Lamborghini getting caught by Hugo Cook. Charlotte's only just behind the wheel of the car, as is Hugo. And what is Charlotte going to do here? She doesn't need to race the Audi. It's in a separate group. So you could just let the Audi go through and maybe learn something from Hugo Cook. And Charlotte Gilbert, I think, yeah, lets him go. Sensible driving that. No doubt the team on the radio saying, let it go, let it go. We're still, at the moment, going to be in a strong position, second in the group. That's good for the team's championship, good for their overall championship as well, because we haven't seen Graham and Dan Dazil out at every single round so far this year. Such have been their commitments with other championships that they race that Ferrari in. So place gained for Hugo Cook. That now moves the Audi up into second position. And I think Charlotte Gilbert will probably drop from third down to fourth shortly, because Tom Roach is in full attack mode, because he has just set the fastest lap of the race, 2 minutes 17.405. So brilliant stuff from Tom. Through and past Charlotte Gilbert goes Tom Roach, and now he'll be fully focused once more on catching the Audi that lies ahead. So the J&S Racing Audi, the R8 GT3 Evo 2, second iteration of Evo kits that were supplied by Audi to teams. Continuing to lead Group GT3, but by how much is the big question. The start of this lap, it was around about 3 seconds was the advantage that Hugo Cook had over Tom Roach. But if you look into the background of the shot now, I'm sure those McLaren headlights are closer to the Audi tail lights than they were, and the sector times over the course of this lap suggesting that is going to be the case as well. Not by much, maybe 1/4 of a second gained in the first sector of the lap. And as they come up towards the conclusion of the second sector, which is by far the longest sector here on the Silverstone Grand Prix circuit, has Tom Roach been able to close further onto the coattails of Hugo Cook, whilst Graham Desile still continues to lead by what was around about 16 seconds at the start of this lap. So the second sector they just come up to now, and it's a purple second sector from Hugo Cook. He is 6 seconds quicker than the race leader just through the middle sector of the lap. So what was a 16 3/4 second lead for Graham Desile in the Ferrari at the start of this lap is going to be whittled down by a fair old margin, because Hugo Cook was also about 3 seconds quicker through the first sector. So over the start-finish line now go, and it's down to 6 seconds now. Hugo Cook pushing hard, brand new fastest lap of the race, 2 minutes 16.807. That means that the gap between himself and Tom Roach comes out by about 0.4 of a second now. Black and white warning flag for track limits going out in the direction of James Wallace. Well, you don't really want to be going beyond the track limits in these tricky conditions, because the painted surface of the curbs or a bit of grass is soon going to bite you. But brilliant drive from Hugo Cook at the wheel of the Audi. The J&S Racing Audi is closing in on the Group GTC Ferrari. Now, Graham Desile may well just let the Audi go through and not put up a great fight, because it's not going to affect the championship points that the Ferrari will score if the Audi goes through, because they are in a separate group. Group GTC car that leads the way, that's a challenge specification Ferrari. Group GT3 Audi that is there in second place, and again through the first sector of the lap, Hugo Cook was the best part of 2.5 seconds quicker than Graham Desile. Hugo Cook is a young charger. Graham Desile, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, is now not particularly in the first flush of youth. But has lots and lots of racing experience. But I think his lead in this race with 8 minutes to go is going to be fairly short-lived. And is he going to put up much of a fight? I really wouldn't have thought so. The team will be saying on the radio, you're leading the group, don't worry about it, let the GT3 car go through, which is exactly, I'm sure, the communication that would have existed. Through goes Hugo Cook to pick up the lead of the race. And now Graham Desile is down into second place, and for him, he won't worry too much about the next car that's about to catch him, because that is Tom Roach, and Tom Roach is at the wheel of the McLaren 720S GT3, and again, that's a car that sits in Group GT3, so again, if he lets the McLaren go through, doesn't affect the championship scoring for the Ferrari. Onto the brakes, through Brooklands, 7.5 minutes remaining, lap number 16 about to be concluded, and we've got our new race leader to head towards the top of the times this time through. Man who set the fastest lap of the race last time through isn't going to be quite as quick this time because of the overtake. And whilst we wait for him to go through and over the start-finish line, what is the gap between himself and Tom Roach? Well, we'll have to wait and see. I think we can hand back down to the pit lane with 7 minutes to go, where Piers Price managed to catch up with somebody else. Who have you got this time, Piers?
We've got Paul Rogers down here for the number 76 McLaren, and Paul, tough conditions out there, but you had a smile on your face when I came over to see you a moment ago. You clearly enjoyed yourself.
I quite enjoyed this session going round, but I got trapped behind a Lambo, unfortunately, and the Lambo's way slower in the corner, but in these conditions it's really dangerous to pass people, but then they pull away on the straights, so I was kind of a little bit boxed at the back, so we should be a little bit further forward, but James is off and running now, we'll see how he goes. But the conditions are fun, but dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. It's so fine line, isn't it? You're mentioning that you haven't had a huge amount of experience in these cars specifically. You normally a Ferrari driver yourself, but are you enjoying it so far, the McLaren?
I kind of wish I had my Ferrari today in these conditions because they're brilliant in the wet. The GT3 is just a bit more snappy, and although you get the traction control banged up and the rest of it, this is a brand new car. I only got 3 half an hours in it, and then straight into a wet race. And this is the first time I've driven it in the wet in the race. So on the outlap, I was just thinking, how fast can I go? I had no idea.
A lot to get used to. Anyway, glad you're enjoying yourself, and let's see how James gets on in the second half of the race.
Thank you.
Thanks, Piers. Yeah, always good to catch up with Paul Rogers. Had a good chat to him after yesterday's race there in the pit lane himself, and team manager at 76, which is Jody Firth, who I used to race with back in my old Formula TKM karting days many years ago. So Tom Roach is still there in the orange racing powered by JMH McLaren, the number 67 car, that is now up into second place overall, because that also managed to sneak through and ahead of Graham Desile. So it is Group GT3 cars first and second. In third place, it's the Group GTC leading car, which is Graham Desile. It is Tom Fleming in another Group GTC car that's there in 4th place now, as he's gone ahead of Charlotte Gilbert on that lap. So the Top Cats Racing Lamborghini now dropping down to 5th. It's 3rd in the group, but the car ahead of it that's just overtaken it is an invitation class car, so they would get the points for 2nd in the group, if that makes sense. And then after Charlotte Gilbert, it is going to be Chris Hart, who leads Group GTH at the moment at the wheel of the Morpheus Racing number 69 Mercedes. Ed Peed is in 7th place. It's James Wallace in 8th position. 9th place goes away the Group GTO leading car, which is Ross Wiley, completing the top 10 at the moment. It's car number 999, which I believe is the car that's now been taken over by Russ Lindsay, for part 2 of the race. So for Sasha Kakad, leading the way, but the lead advantage is down to 2.4 seconds, and that is because we have seen another new fastest lap of the race for the charging Welshman, Tom Roach, in 2nd position. 2 minutes 16.213 for Tom Roach. So there might only be 4 minutes remaining on the clock, which is going to equate to what, this lap and one, maybe at the very most 2 more thereafter. But he's not given up his aspirations on catching the Audi, and if he catches it, he wouldn't rule out the fact that maybe he might just have a nibble to see whether he can prise the door open. But they'll also be conscious of the championship as well, because they came into this weekend lying jointly 4th overall in the championship. They were 2nd overall in the standings in Group GT3, and it's been a solid weekend also for Sasha Kaga and Hugo Cook, who lead the Group GT3 Championship coming into this weekend. They were lying 3rd overall when you add all of the groups together, so it's quite tight in the championship standings. And of course, remember, we've still got, even after this, 8 championship races to go as well. So there's lots of points up for grabs, because if you've got sufficient starters in the group, and you have in GT3 for this weekend, it's 25 points for a win, whether that be a sprint race or a pit stop race. The points you score are identical. 18 points for 2nd, 15 for 3rd, and then it's 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2 and 1. That's the way it works. There are no drop scores either, so you count every single race, so consistency is always the key in the GT Cup Championship. 3 minutes to go. Up towards the braking area at Brooklands comes Hugo Cook in the lead of the race. Tom Roach was half a second quicker through the 1st sector. He matched the race leader for pace through the 2nd sector, so the gap that was 2.4 seconds is going to be hovering around 2 at the end of this lap. We've had another new fastest lap of the race, and it's now come from Ross Wiley in the Group GTO leading Lamborghini with a 2-minute 15.770 from the Scotsman. But what has happened to the lead gap? I think around 2 seconds at the end of this one. And as they come over the start-finish line, it is, yeah, Ed would think I've done that before, 2.020 seconds at the start of what will be the penultimate lap. So there's still more than a lap time left on the clock as they came over the start-finish line. So Hugo Cook has got this lap and one more thereafter to see if he can hang on to the lead of the race. The first sprint race of the weekend was won by Hugo Cook. Is he going to bookend the weekend, winning the final race of the weekend? So it's already 4 wins for J&S Racing. Mikey Broadhurst at the wheel of the McLaren is also trying to hunt down the Mercedes in the hands of Seb Morris, and that will be for position. So that will be for 2nd and 3rd in Group GTH, 11th and 12th overall at the moment. The older spec McLaren was originally scheduled to have been one of a couple of cars, I think, that Greystone were going to put into the championship, but it's just the one in the end that we've got for this year, and it is the older 570S McLaren rather than the Artura, which is the newer model of it. There's Chris Murphy also at the wheel of the BMW, Mr. Consistency, running in 13th position. That will be 2nd in Group GTO, and completing the podium in Group GTO will be Jay Shepherd at the wheel of the National Motorsport Academy Lotus, which returns to the championship this weekend. So Seb Morris, is the gap closing between himself and Mikey Broadhurst? It looks as though it is to me. Mikey Broadhurst was 0.3 of a second quicker through the 1st sector. He was a further 1/10 of a second quicker through the 2nd sector. So he's pushing hard on this lap, is Mikey, at the wheel of the almost teal and black McLaren over the start-finish line. And they'll be heading on to what will be their penultimate lap of the race. However, our race leader, Hugo Cook, will be heading on to his final lap of the race very shortly. Is the checkered flag going to come out this time through? There is a bit of time on the clock, but we have seen a couple of races earlier on today where the checkered flag comes out a little bit earlier. Are we going to go the full distance? Looks as though we are. Yep, so with 18 seconds to go. On to the last lap of the race goes Hugo Cook, and the lead advantage has come down by another 0.4 of a second. It's down to just 1.5 seconds between himself and Tom Roach. But in these tricky conditions, in two equally matched cars, whether it be the Audi that leads or the McLaren in second place, Tom Roach is still too far away. And I think he's just not going to close sufficiently. The gap, you know, even if it comes down by what it came down on the previous lap, it's still going to be hovering around a second at the end of this one. So it's not going to stop Tom Roach pushing as hard as he possibly can, because any small mistake from the race leader, Hugo Cook, and all of a sudden Tom Roach is more than within touching distance. So a quick flash of the light to see if he can put him off as they head up towards Stowe Corner, and then for the final time splash their way downhill and in towards the Vale. For second and third in Group GTH, Mikey Broadhurst is also nipping at the heels of the Ram Racing Mercedes in the hands of Seb Morris. Those two just flicking their way through Abbey and up towards Farm. Is Mikey going to try anything as they head on towards the brakes at Village? He is. He's going to try and throw it up the inside of the Ram Racing Mercedes. Seb Morris gives him room and hangs on to the inside line as they head up towards the loop. And the Mercedes is still just ahead of the McLaren. Can Mikey Broadhurst cut back on the exit? No, he can't. They've got Russ Lindsay's 999 Porsche just ahead of them. And Russ is in 10th place at the moment. So this is 10th, 11th and 12th altogether. Now both looking to try and weave their way through and past the Porsche. Is Russ going to let them go? I think he will, as he heads up towards Brooklands. Yep, so through goes Mikey Broadhurst. He's got the job done. He's through and ahead off Seb Morris in the Mercedes, who was almost sideways and right on the curbs. The usual racing line heading in towards Brooklands Corner, but brilliant drive from Mikey Broadhurst. He's now up into 11th place overall, and that will also give him the second place position in Group GTH. But for our race leader, Hugo Cook, and of course Sasha Kakad, who started behind the wheel of the car, they are on course for win number 5 of the championship season, and that's going to be the second win this weekend as well. So over the start-finish line they'll go. It's a win for J&S Racing and the Audi of Sasha Kakad and Hugo Cook. Simon Orange and Tom Roach finish in second position as well. Brilliant drive considering they started 12th on the grid and had to remain stationary for an extra 5 seconds compared to that Audi as well. So had it not have been for those two, they certainly would have been looking towards an overall win. It looks as though Group GTH is surely going to go the way of this car as well, which is the Morpheus Racing Mercedes of Stephen Walton, who started, and Chris Hart, who took over it. And despite all of the efforts from both Charlotte Gilbert and from Gilbert Yates, it's not quite going to be the win in Group GTC for Top Cats Racing and the Lamborghini, but it is good points for them in the overall standings and good points for them in the team standings as well, because Group GTC win goes the way of the invitation class car of James Owen and Tom Fleming from Graham and Dan Dazil in their Ferrari, and then the Lamborghini of Gilbert Yates and Charlotte Gilbert. 6th place over the start-finish line should be Andre Borodin and Ed Peed, which it is. 7th place is going to go the way of Paul Rogers and James Wallace. We caught up with Paul in the pit lane, and Paul Bailey and Ross Wiley finish in 8th place, but will scoop up the win in Group GTO and get the fastest lap of the race as well with a 2-minute 15.550. And this is going to be the car that will win Group GTH. So brilliant stuff from Stephen Walton and Chris Hart all day today. In the tricky conditions, they have been ones to watch, and I think that now for them is going to be their 5th group win in Group GTH, whether it be sprint races or pit stop races of the season. So for the Audi, it's another win for Simon Orange and Tom Roach. 2nd place, been outscored by, you could argue, their main championship rivals in Group GT3, but the one good thing is, in what were very tricky and very challenging conditions, everybody kept it on the island. We had that small spin for Andre Borodin, but other than that, in tricky conditions, everybody coped with everything that was thrown at them, quite literally. And here comes the final couple of cars to take the checker flag. It's going to be Mikey Broadhurst and Phil Carter that finish in the final place inside the top 10. Now that will be 2nd in Group GTH, only just ahead of Seb Morris, who brought the car to the checkered flag, but Charles Dawson doing all the hard work in the closing stages. And the final car to take the checkered flag is going to be the car of Patrick Collins and Russ Lindsay. So they are all safely through what was a very tricky, a very challenging, and as we heard from the likes of Paul Rogers, a slightly dangerous race as well, but everybody goes home with a big smile on their face. Sasha Kakad and Hugo Cook claim the win from Simon Orange and Tom Roach in second place, and the winning Group GTC goes the way of James Owen and Tom Fleming there in third, ahead of Graham and Danton Tizil, and then the car of Charlotte Gilbert and Gilbert Yates. Andre Borodin and Ed Peed, who started from pole, finished 6th in the end, ahead of Paul Rogers and James Wallace, who were 7th. Paul Bailey and Ross Wiley claim the Group GTO honours in 8th place overall. In 9th place, it's the Group GTC winners, Stephen Walton and Chris Hart. Philip Carter and Mikey Broadhurst complete the top 10, and as we head outside of the top 10, in 11th place, it's Charles Dawson and Seth Morris, ahead of Patrick Collins and Russ Lindsay. Chris Murphy comes home in 13th, ahead of David Franklin, Ed Bridle, and then Jay Shepherd is there in 15th, with the final car that finished being Doc Bush, because it looks as though Seamus Jennings and Greg Caton did get out in the end, but they will have finished somewhat distant, 3 laps off the pace as a result of that car not wanting to go when the lights went out. But thankfully, they were able to join the race.